Dakota Territory, 1875. The untamed wilderness of the Black Hills stretched before Isaac Wallace like a challenge written in sage and stone. At 26, he'd spent 8 years driving cattle, chasing horizons, and convincing himself that loneliness was simply the price a man paid for freedom in the West. The setting sun painted the prairie gold as he rode toward the small settlement of Clearwater, his shadow long against the tall grass, his heart hardened by years of self-reliance. A man needs nothing but his horse, his gun, and open country, Isaac muttered to himself, a mantra he'd repeated since the war had taken his father and brother, leaving him to fend for himself at 18. The belief had protected him, kept him moving, prevented attachments that would only lead to more loss. The West was no place for putting down roots, not for a man like him. Only the foolish opened themselves to the kind of pain that love inevitably brought. His lean frame carried the strength of years spent in the saddle, his face sun-browned beneath his wide-brimmed hat. Though handsome with piercing blue eyes and the faint stubble of 3 days' ride, Isaac rarely noticed the appreciative glances from women in the towns he passed through. His mind was set on the cattle drive waiting beyond Clearwater, another season of dust and danger that suited his solitary nature. As Clearwater came into view, a collection of wooden structures and promise on the edge of civilization, Isaac noted the fresh paint on what appeared to be a newly constructed schoolhouse. Progress was creeping westward, bringing with it the trappings of civilized society he'd spent years avoiding. He nudged his horse forward, planning nothing more than a night's rest and supplies before moving on. Attachments were dangerous. Roots were for trees, not cowboys. Tessa Montgomery straightened her desk for the 3rd time that afternoon, her delicate fingers arranging the chalk and primer with precision. At 22, she had traveled further from her Boston home than she'd ever imagined possible, driven by a belief that education could transform the frontier. Her chestnut hair was pinned neatly beneath a modest bonnet. Her blue calico dress chosen specifically for her first day teaching the children of Clearwater. Education brings light to darkness, she whispered, a phrase her father had impressed upon her before consumption had claimed him 2 years prior. It was this belief that had propelled her westward when the teaching position was advertised. The East held too many memories, too much grief. The frontier represented purpose, a chance to matter in a world that desperately needed civilizing influences. Yet beneath her composure lay uncertainty. Boston had not prepared her for the rawness of Dakota Territory. The vast emptiness sometimes awakened a loneliness so profound it stole her breath. She'd come believing she could change the West through knowledge and refinement, but sometimes wondered if the West might change her first, and whether she had the strength to endure its harsh realities alone. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew Tessa to the schoolhouse window. A rider appeared, silhouetted against the setting sun, the very embodiment of the untamed West she hoped to refine. Something about his solitary figure stirred an unexpected feeling in her chest. Not fear, but recognition of a kindred solitude. Isaac's first encounter with Tessa Montgomery occurred not with romantic poetry or moonlight, but with mud and chaos. The spring rains had transformed Clearwater's main street into a treacherous quagmire, and Isaac was leading his horse carefully past the general store when the commotion erupted. A team of horses pulling a heavily loaded wagon spooked at a clap of thunder, lurching forward directly toward a small boy frozen in terror in their path. Without thought, Isaac lunged forward, but someone else had moved even faster. A blur of blue calico and determined grace, a young woman grabbed the child and tumbled with him towards safety, directly into the deepest mud puddle on the street. Isaac reached them in 3 long strides, extending his hand toward the mud-splattered woman who sat protectively curled around the sobbing child. "Are you injured, ma'am?" he asked, taking in her soiled dress and the fierce protective instinct that had driven her action. Tessa Montgomery looked up, mud streaking her cheek, chestnut hair escaping its pins, and met Isaac's eyes with a directness that startled him. "Only my dignity, I suspect," she replied, accepting his hand while keeping one arm around the boy. "Though I believe my dress has suffered a mortal wound." The unexpected humor in her voice contradicted everything Isaac believed about Eastern women. As he helped her to her feet, the child's mother arrived in a flurry of gratitude and tears, reclaiming her son. "You're new to Clearwater," Isaac observed, noticing how she held herself with dignity despite her bedraggled appearance. "The schoolteacher," she confirmed, attempting to brush mud from her ruined dress. "Miss Montgomery. Though I fear my first impression on the town will be somewhat less scholarly than I'd hoped. I reckon saving a child counts for more than appearances out here, Miss Montgomery," Isaac replied, surprised by his desire to ease her embarrassment. "Isaac Wallace, just passing through." "Everyone is just passing through Clearwater, Mr. Wallace," she said with unexpected perception. "It's the nature of the frontier, is it not? Always moving, never settling." Her words struck uncomfortably close to the philosophy he'd built his life around. But before he could respond, the town's mayor appeared, fussing over the new schoolteacher and insisting she be escorted to her boarding house to change. As she was led away, Tessa glanced back at Isaac, her gaze lingering for a moment. "Perhaps I'll see you again, Mr. Wallace, preferably under drier circumstances." Something about her calm courage in the face of danger, her quick thinking and quicker action, left Isaac unsettled. She represented everything he avoided: civilization, permanence, connection. Yet he found himself reluctantly impressed. It was a complication he hadn't anticipated in Clearwater, and one he intended to leave behind as soon as possible. The cattle drive that had brought Isaac to Clearwater was delayed by 3 days due to disputes with the rancher. 3 days that stretched into unfamiliar territory as Isaac found himself repeatedly crossing paths with the new schoolteacher. He encountered her at the general store, selecting books with the same care another might give to choosing a fine horse. He spotted her walking children home after school, pointing out plants and teaching them even outside classroom walls. He observed her quiet determination to bring education to a town that valued horsemanship over penmanship. On his 3rd evening in town, Isaac found himself drawn to the small church where a community social was underway. He told himself he was merely seeking a hot meal before the long drive ahead, but his eyes searched the gathering until they found her. Tessa stood with several children, organizing some sort of educational game with cards laid out on a table. Her face animated with enthusiasm, she appeared transformed from the mud-splattered woman of their first meeting. Tonight her chestnut hair was arranged in a simple but elegant style, her green dress modest but becoming. Isaac remained at the periphery, nursing a cup of coffee, watching how easily she interacted with both children and adults. "She's something, ain't she?" Old Sam, the livery stable owner, appeared at Isaac's side, following his gaze. "Came all the way from Boston, if you can believe it. Most Eastern ladies last about 2 winters out here before they hightail it back to civilization. What makes her different?" Isaac found himself asking. Sam shrugged. "Got spirit. Reminds me of the prairie itself. Looks delicate, but there's a toughness underneath. Watched her break up a fight between the Miller boys yesterday. Didn't raise her voice once, but those boys straightened up like they'd faced down a grizzly." Isaac's planned early departure the next morning was further delayed when he discovered his horse had thrown a shoe. By noon, he found himself outside the schoolhouse, drawn by curiosity and something deeper he refused to name. The children were at recess, their shouts and laughter carrying across the schoolyard. Tessa stood watching them, a small smile playing at her lips. "Mr. Wallace," she acknowledged his approach without surprise. "Still passing through? Horse needs tending," he explained, removing his hat. "Should be moving on tomorrow." "Always tomorrow," she observed. "Never today." "That's the cowboy way," he replied, defensive without understanding why. Tessa studied him for a moment. "I've been teaching the children about explorers, men who never stopped moving, always seeking the next horizon. I wonder, though, what they were really looking for." Her insight unsettled him. "Some men aren't meant for settling down, Miss Montgomery. The frontier needs those willing to face its wildness." "And some women," she countered with unexpected sharpness. "The frontier also needs those willing to build something lasting within that wildness, Mr. Wallace. Otherwise, what's the purpose of all that exploring?" A child called for her attention before he could formulate a response. As she turned away, Isaac realized she had challenged his most fundamental belief, that movement meant freedom, that attachments were chains. For the first time, he wondered if his restlessness was less about freedom and more about fear. The cattle drive that should have taken Isaac away from Clearwater was canceled entirely when news arrived that the buyer had gone bankrupt. Suddenly, without employment and with dwindling funds, Isaac reluctantly accepted temporary work helping rebuild the livery stable damaged in a recent storm. Days stretched into weeks, and to his own surprise, he found himself lingering in Clearwater, taking odd jobs, and telling himself it was merely practical economics. In truth, he was drawn into an orbit around Tessa Montgomery. Their encounters grew more frequent. Debates over books she lent him, conversations on the church steps after Sunday service, her quiet appreciation when he repaired the schoolhouse steps without being asked. Each interaction chipped away at his conviction that attachment meant vulnerability. One evening in late May, Isaac found himself escorting Tessa home from a community meeting. Twilight painted the prairie in lavender and gold, the spring air carrying the scent of wildflowers. "I never understood why anyone would choose to live out here," Tessa admitted as they walked. "In Boston, everything felt contained, predictable. But this vastness, it frightened me at first. Now I find it breathtaking." "What brought you west if you feared it?" Isaac asked. Tessa's pace slowed. "After my father died, there was nothing keeping me in Boston except memories. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Dakota Territory, it felt like an escape. Perhaps I'm not so different from your wandering cowboys after all." Her honesty prompted his own. "My father and brother died at Gettysburg. Afterward, home felt like a tomb. I headed west because nothing there could remind me of what I'd lost." "So we're both running from something," she said softly. "I prefer to think of it as riding towards something," Isaac corrected, though her words had struck home. "And what would that be, Mr. Wallace?" The question hung between them, unanswerable because Isaac had never allowed himself to envision a destination, only the journey away from pain. Their growing connection faced its first significant test in early June. Isaac had begun helping at the school, teaching the older boys practical skills like rope work and basic carpentry. After class one afternoon, as they worked together organizing supplies, Tessa mentioned plans for expanding the school come fall. "The town council has approved funding for another classroom," she explained excitedly. "We'll be able to separate the older and younger students." "You're planning that far ahead?" Isaac asked, surprised. "Of course. Education requires vision, Mr. Wallace." Her enthusiasm was palpable. "I've already written to a former classmate who might join me as the second teacher. By next year, we could even offer adult education in the evenings." The permanence of her plans triggered Isaac's old instincts. "Sounds like you're planning to put down deep roots. Isn't that what the frontier needs? People willing to commit to its future?" she challenged. "Some people aren't meant for roots," he replied, retreating behind his old philosophy. Tessa's expression cooled. "I see. And you're one of those people, I presume?" "The West is still wild, Miss Montgomery. Building something permanent just means having more to lose when nature or fate takes it away. That's a convenient belief for avoiding connections," she observed with unexpected sharpness. "But rather lonely, isn't it?" Her words followed Isaac for days afterward, echoing in his mind as he lay awake in his rented room above the livery. The prospect of Tessa building a life in Clearwater, a life that would continue with or without him, awakened a fear he'd been suppressing, not of attachment, but of being left behind. The following week brought Clearwater's Independence Day celebration. The small town transformed with bunting and flags, a dance platform constructed in the center of town. Despite his internal conflict, Isaac found himself helping with preparations, hauling lumber and raising tents for the festivities. The evening of the celebration, Clearwater came alive with music and laughter. Isaac stood at the edge of the gathering, watching couples circling on the dance platform, feeling both part of and separate from the community. His eyes found Tessa automatically, radiant in a dress of deep blue, her hair adorned with a simple ribbon. She was teaching a group of children a dance, her movements graceful and patient. "You going to stand there all night, or ask her to dance?" Sam appeared beside him, the older man's eyes knowing. "I'm not much for dancing," Isaac demurred. "Not much for taking chances, you mean," Sam countered. "Been watching you two circle each other like cautious colts for weeks now. Life's short on the frontier, son. Too short for that kind of hesitation." Before Isaac could respond, commotion erupted at the edge of town. A rider approached at dangerous speed, horse-lathered and wild-eyed. The music faltered as the messenger delivered his news. A party of settlers had been stranded by a flash flood 10 miles west, their wagons overturned, several injured. The town mobilized immediately. Men gathered horses and supplies while women prepared bandages and food. Isaac found himself organizing a rescue party without hesitation, his experience with difficult terrain suddenly valuable. "I'm coming with you." Tessa appeared at his side, already changing her dancing slippers for sturdy boots someone had brought her. "It's too dangerous," Isaac protested. "There will be injured children," she stated simply, her expression brooking no argument. "I have medical training from my father. I'm going." Something in her quiet determination silenced his objections. As they rode out with the rescue party, Isaac realized that her kind of courage, the steadfast commitment to others regardless of personal risk, was a different sort of bravery than he had valued before. His had been the courage of the lone wolf. Hers was the courage of the shepherd. The scene at the flood site was chaos. Overturned wagons, frightened livestock, children crying. Isaac worked tirelessly alongside the other men, securing lines across the swollen creek to retrieve stranded families, while Tessa moved among the injured with quiet competence, cleaning wounds and offering comfort. As night fell, they established a temporary camp. The rescued settlers huddled around fires. Isaac found Tessa kneeling beside a young woman in labor, her calm voice guiding the frightened mother-to-be through contractions. He brought them water and blankets, then withdrew to give them privacy, awed by Tessa's steadfast presence in the face of such vulnerability. Near dawn, the cry of a newborn broke the camp's exhausted silence. Isaac approached to find Tessa cradling a tiny infant, her face illuminated by firelight, and something deeper, a profound joy that transcended the night's hardships. "A girl," she told him softly as he knelt beside her. Healthy and strong. The mother had fallen asleep from exhaustion, and Tessa continued to hold the swaddled infant. In that moment, watching her with the newborn, something shifted fundamentally in Isaac's understanding of strength and vulnerability. The courage to create life, to build something lasting in a harsh world. This was not weakness but the deepest kind of strength. "You're remarkable," he said simply, the words inadequate for the revelation he was experiencing. Tessa's eyes met his, no barriers between them in this raw moment. "Life continues, Mr. Wallace. Even on the frontier. Perhaps especially here, where every new life is an act of faith in the future." The journey back to Clearwater the next day was slow and careful, the rescued families integrated into their caravan. Isaac rode beside the wagon where Tessa traveled with the new mother and infant. Watching her interact with the settlers, learning their names, their stories, their hopes, he realized she was building connections that would outlast any structure of wood or stone. As Clearwater came into view, Isaac made a decision that surprised him with its clarity. For the first time since heading west, he did not feel the urge to move on. Something stronger than restlessness had taken root in him. Something with chestnut hair and unwavering conviction. The rescued settlers were welcomed into Clearwater with open arms, the community rallying to provide temporary housing and supplies. In the days that followed, Isaac found himself increasingly involved in town affairs, helping construct additional housing and offering his knowledge of cattle and horses to the newcomers. One evening in late July, he sought out Tessa as she closed the schoolhouse. The summer session had ended, and she was preparing for the fall term, her dedication undiminished by the season's heat. "Miss Montgomery," he greeted her formally, suddenly nervous despite weeks of growing closeness. "I think after delivering a baby together, you might call me Tessa," she suggested, a smile playing at her lips. "Tessa," he amended, the name feeling right on his tongue. "I've been thinking about what you said, about building something that lasts." "Have you?" Her eyes held cautious hope. "I've spent 8 years believing attachment meant vulnerability," he admitted. "That staying in one place meant risking loss. But watching you these past months, the way you build connections, create community, I'm starting to think I had it backwards." "How so?" she prompted gently. "Maybe real vulnerability is never allowing yourself to belong anywhere. Never giving yourself the chance to build something meaningful." The words came with difficulty, challenging years of carefully constructed beliefs. "I've been offered a position managing the Henderson Ranch outside town. I'm considering taking it." Tessa's eyes widened. "That would mean staying in Clearwater." "It would," he confirmed, "if there was sufficient reason to stay." The unspoken question hung between them. Tessa's cheeks colored slightly, but her gaze remained steady. Clearwater would benefit from someone with your experience, Mr. Wallace. The children certainly enjoy your lessons. Isaac, he corrected softly. And is that the only benefit to my staying? A moment of courage passed between them. The same courage that had sent her into a flooded creek to save strangers, that had driven him to abandon his solitary existence. No, she admitted quietly. Not the only benefit. Their courtship unfolded through the remainder of summer and into fall. Walks after Sunday services, shared meals at community gatherings, quiet conversations on the schoolhouse steps. Isaac took the position at the Henderson Ranch, discovering unexpected satisfaction in helping build something lasting. His knowledge of cattle and terrain proved valuable as the ranch expanded, and for the first time, he found himself planning for seasons beyond the current one. Tessa's school flourished with the influx of new families. Her classroom often overflowed, and Isaac helped her construct additional benches and desks on weekends. Their growing attachment became a topic of gentle town gossip, but neither minded. Something profound was taking shape between them, a partnership based on shared purpose rather than merely shared affection. The first significant test of their relationship came in October. A telegram arrived for Tessa from Boston. Her maternal aunt had fallen ill and requested her return. The news threw their future into uncertainty, confronting both with the possibility of separation. I should go to her, Tessa explained as they walked along the creek that had become their favorite retreat. She raised me after my mother died. I owe her that much. Of course you must go, Isaac agreed, though the prospect of her departure awakened his old fear of abandonment. When would you return? Tessa hesitated. She has no one else, Isaac. If her condition is serious, I might need to remain in Boston indefinitely. The words landed like stones. After months of cautiously building trust, of allowing himself to envision a future in one place, with one person, Isaac faced the prospect of losing everything he had begun to value. I see, he managed, the old walls threatening to rise again. Then I suppose we must prepare for your departure. Isaac, she touched his arm gently. This doesn't have to end what we've begun, doesn't it? The bitterness in his voice surprised them both. Boston is a world away from Clearwater. You would return to civilization, to culture and comfort. Why would you come back to this? Because this is where I've found purpose, she answered with quiet certainty. Where I've found you. But the old belief that attachment inevitably led to loss had resurfaced with painful force. In the week before her departure, Isaac withdrew, throwing himself into ranch work, avoiding town whenever possible. His behavior confused and hurt Tessa, but his fear of abandonment overwhelmed the fragile trust they had built. The morning of her departure, Isaac couldn't stay away despite his resolve. He arrived at the stagecoach stop as her trunk was being loaded, finding her standing alone, her traveling clothes neat, but her eyes red-rimmed. I thought you weren't coming, she said simply. I wanted to wish you safe travels, he replied stiffly, the words inadequate for the turmoil within him. Is that all you wanted, Isaac? The question hung between them, a final opportunity. But the stagecoach driver called for passengers, and the moment slipped away as Tessa boarded with a last, lingering look. Isaac watched the stagecoach disappear into the distance, carrying away the woman who had challenged his most fundamental beliefs about the frontier and his place within it. Only as dust settled on the empty road did he recognize his mistake. In trying to protect himself from loss, he had guaranteed it. The weeks following Tessa's departure were the darkest of Isaac's time in Clearwater. He worked relentlessly at the Henderson Ranch, avoiding town and the painful reminders of her absence. The schoolhouse where a substitute teacher now presided, the church pew where they had sat together each Sunday, the town social gatherings that felt hollow without her presence. Letters arrived from Boston, each one describing her aunt's slow recovery and life in the city. Isaac read them with hungry eyes, but could not bring himself to respond, convinced that she would soon announce her decision to remain in Boston permanently. Each letter became both treasure and torment, evidence of her continuing care, but also reminder of the distance between them. As November turned harsh, an early blizzard struck Dakota Territory. Isaac found himself trapped at the Henderson Ranch, the buildings nearly buried in drifting snow. For 3 days, he and the ranch hands fought to keep livestock alive in the brutal conditions, working until exhaustion claimed them. On the 4th day, as the storm finally abated, a rider appeared at the ranch, Sam from the livery stable, half frozen but determined. Telegram came through before the lines went down. He explained as they thawed him by the fire. Thought you'd want to know. Miss Montgomery's aunt passed 3 days ago. She's coming back on the eastbound train, due yesterday. Isaac felt the blood drain from his face. The train that would have been caught in the blizzard? Sam nodded grimly. No word yet which trains made it to shelter. Town's organizing search parties as soon as the pass is clear. The next hours were a blur as Isaac prepared for the search, gathering supplies, selecting the strongest horses, planning routes. His mind filled with terrible images of Tessa trapped in a stranded train, cold and alone while he had wallowed in self-pity at the ranch. The irony was unbearable. His fear of losing her might have manifested the very outcome he dreaded most. The search party departed at dawn, Isaac driving them forward with single-minded determination. They followed the railroad tracks west, finding drifts higher than a man's head in places. By midday, they located the first stranded train, its passengers cold but safe, having burned seats and baggage to maintain heat. Tessa was not among them. They continued westward, finding a second train by nightfall, this one in worse condition, its coal supply depleted and passengers suffering from cold and hunger. As Isaac moved through the cars distributing supplies and organizing evacuations, dread built within him. No sign of Tessa. It was near midnight when a conductor from the second train provided the crucial information. A third train had been diverted to a siding with a small depot building 10 miles further west. This train had departed Boston 3 days earlier than scheduled. Despite exhaustion and the protests of other searchers, Isaac set out immediately with 2 volunteers. The bitter cold seemed to crystallize his thoughts, burning away the protective layers he had built around his heart. If he found Tessa, when he found her, there would be no more walls between them. The risk of love was nothing compared to the certainty of regret. They reached the siding shortly before dawn. The small depot building glowed with faint light, smoke rising from its chimney, signs of life that caused Isaac's heart to leap. As they approached, the door opened, and a figure stepped out, silhouetted against the interior light. Even at a distance, he knew her. Tessa stood wrapped in a borrowed coat, her chestnut hair escaping from beneath a woolen scarf. She had been helping distribute hot coffee to passengers, her instinct to care for others undiminished by her own ordeal. Isaac dismounted, his legs nearly giving way beneath him as relief flooded through his system. He crossed the distance between them in long strides, stopping just short of embracing her, suddenly uncertain of his welcome after weeks of silence. "You came," she said simply, her voice hoarse from cold. "I should have come sooner," he replied. "Not just for the search. I should have come after you to Boston. I should have answered your letters. I should have—" "You're here now," she interrupted, her gloved hand reaching for his. "That's what matters." In the depot's crowded warmth, surrounded by strangers brought together by circumstance, Isaac finally surrendered the belief that had governed his life since the war, that love was a vulnerability he could not afford. Looking at Tessa's exhausted but determined face, he understood that love was not a weakness but the greatest strength the frontier offered. "I was afraid," he admitted quietly when they found a moment alone. "Afraid that if I allowed myself to need you, to build a life around you, losing you would destroy me. But these weeks without you taught me something. I was already destroyed. Not by loving you, but by refusing to love fully. The frontier teaches us to be self-reliant," Tessa responded, her eyes soft with understanding. "It's a necessary skill for survival. But it's not sufficient for living, Isaac. Not really living." "Why did you come back?" he asked, the question that had haunted him for weeks. "You could have stayed in Boston, returned to civilization." "Because Boston isn't home anymore," she said simply. "Clearwater is. You are." The journey back to Clearwater took 2 days, the rescued passengers distributed among sleds and horses. Isaac didn't leave Tessa's side, as if afraid she might disappear again. During the slow travel, she told him of her aunt's passing, of the realization that her purpose and heart remained in Dakota Territory. "She told me something before she died," Tessa explained as they rode together. She said, "Go where you're needed, not just where you're comfortable." It made me understand that what we're building in Clearwater, the school, the community, matters in ways that Boston society never could. "And us?" Isaac asked, the question that mattered most. What are we building, Tessa? Her smile was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. Something lasting, I hope. Something that could withstand any blizzard. They reached Clearwater on Christmas Eve, the town transformed by fresh snow and holiday decorations. The reunions were joyous as rescued passengers were welcomed into homes and celebrations. That evening, at the church service, Isaac sat beside Tessa, their hands linked in plain view of the community that had watched their relationship unfold. As candles illuminated the simple church, Isaac recognized how profoundly his understanding of the frontier had changed. He had come west believing that freedom meant solitude, that strength meant self-reliance. Tessa had shown him a different truth, that the frontier's greatest promise was not endless movement, but the opportunity to build something meaningful on fresh ground. After the service, they walked through the snow-covered town, Clearwater transformed into something magical by moonlight and fresh powder. "I have something to ask you," Isaac said as they paused outside the schoolhouse. "I've been carrying it since before you left for Boston." From his pocket, he withdrew a small wooden box, carved with prairie wildflowers, his own handiwork during the lonely weeks of her absence. "I don't have much to offer except this promise. I'm done running. Whatever we build together, I'll be here to defend it, to nurture it, to cherish it." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold ring set with a small pearl. "Will you marry me, Tessa Montgomery?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, her eyes bright with tears and starlight. "On one condition, that we build our life here, in Clearwater. This town needs both of us, and I think we need it too. No more conditions necessary." Isaac agreed, slipping the ring onto her finger. "My wandering days are done." They were married in the spring of 1876, as prairie flowers blanketed the hills surrounding Clearwater. The small church overflowed with townspeople and the settlers they had rescued together. Tessa wore her mother's lace veil with a dress of pale blue, carrying wildflowers gathered by her students. Isaac stood tall in a new suit, the nervous cowboy transformed into a man with purpose and place. Their vows reflected the journey that had brought them together, promises not just of love, but of partnership in building something lasting on the frontier. As they spoke the words binding them together, both recognized that their union represented something larger than themselves, a commitment to the community they served and the future they envisioned for the territory. Over the next 20 years, Isaac and Tessa Wallace became instrumental in Clearwater's transformation from frontier outpost to thriving town. The Henderson Ranch, eventually purchased by Isaac through years of careful management, became known for innovative breeding practices that helped local ranchers survive the harsh Dakota winters. Tessa's one-room schoolhouse grew into an educational center that trained teachers for settlements throughout the territory. Their home, built on land where they had once walked together under prairie stars, became a gathering place for community celebrations and a haven for travelers and newcomers to the region. 4 children filled their lives with joy and purpose, 3 daughters and a son, each raised with both book learning and frontier skills, Tessa's refinement balanced by Isaac's practical knowledge. In 1896, as Dakota celebrated its 7th year of statehood, the Wallaces stood together on the porch of the home they had built, watching their grandchildren play in the yard where once only prairie grass had grown. Isaac's arms circled Tessa's waist, the gesture as natural as breathing after 20 years together. "Did you ever imagine this?" he asked, gesturing toward the prosperous town that had grown around them, the school and church and businesses that had transformed the wilderness. "When you first came west as that determined Boston schoolteacher." Tessa leaned against him, her chestnut hair now threaded with silver, but her eyes still bright with purpose. "I imagined changing the frontier through education. I never imagined how the frontier would change me, how you would change me." "We changed each other," Isaac corrected gently. "You taught me that real freedom isn't the absence of attachment, but the courage to build something worth protecting." As twilight settled over the prairie that had challenged and shaped them, Isaac and Tessa Wallace stood as living testimony to the frontier's true promise, not endless wilderness, but the opportunity to transform wilderness into home. Their love had indeed changed the frontier, not through grand gestures recorded in history books, but through the quiet revolution of commitment, education, and community in a land where once only the transient had been valued. The cowboy who believed love had no place in the West and the schoolteacher determined to bring civilization to the frontier had discovered a deeper truth together, that the heart's true territory is found not in endless wandering, but in the courage to build something lasting on the very ground beneath your feet.